We don't really think of Steve Jobs as an investor, right? Well, let's see. He resigned from Apple in 1985. He founded and co-founded multiple companies and studios, such as Pixar. He wanted to contribute only to projects he found valuable. Apart from being an undeniable product and marketing genius, he also seemed to have made all the right moves when it came to investments. And that's what allowed him to make even more of them. The snowball effect. So, what can we learn from Mr. Jobs when it comes to investing? Lesson number 1, trust yourself. Now, this may be a little bit extreme, but Steve Jobs basically lied about 2 very big decisions in his early adulthood: dropping out of college, to his parents, and receiving a huge bonus at his Atari job. The story behind that one is that he told his friend Steve Wozniak, who was a whiz with computer board design, how badly Atari wanted their employees to improve an arcade game's logic board, and offered a behind-the-scenes partnership with an equal split between them. After Wozniak drastically improved it, Jobs got a $5,000 bonus. But he told his future partner that he only received $700 and gave half of that to Wozniak. Now that's daring. But it was that partnership that later led to the inception of Apple. So yeah, it seems like whenever Steve Jobs makes a big decision, he believed that he was correct and was making it for the right reasons, and sometimes chose to hide the whole truth in order to not have to explain himself, hoping it's going to work out. It's also important to note that Mr. Jobs had a knowledge of philosophy, was an enthusiast of Zen Buddhism, and even spent some time in India for that reason when he was just 19. It must have contributed to his self-confidence, especially when making such important choices. And while we probably shouldn't go to those extremes often, Mr. Jobs would probably approve of believing in yourself and making the most of every decision. Otherwise, why make them at all? Lesson number 2, find a new angle. Right after leaving Apple and taking a couple of employees with him, Jobs founded Next. However, not even a year in, and the company was starting to have money problems. If it wasn't for Ross Perot's investment, Next would have probably ended up bankrupt. A bit of luck doesn't hurt. Now, why did Jobs leave Apple? Simple answer, the management didn't want to follow his vision. The first Next computer was designed for the education sector, was more technically advanced than others at the time, although that came with a cost. But that's precisely why Jobs decided to focus on education, a market that wasn't really specifically targeted at the time. The computer also featured object-oriented software development systems and an Ethernet port, cornerstones of the next era of computing. A year later, Mr. Jobs founded Pixar by taking Lucasfilm's CG artist with him. The first film the studio made was Toy Story, and the rest is history. After coming back to Apple in 1997, he then went on to create the iPod, iTunes, and obviously the iPhone. Steve Jobs might have just been the master of finding new opportunities in emerging markets and capitalizing on them. Lesson number 3, invest in people. It's an idea already presented by Steve Jobs in 1992 in an MIT lecture. He talks about taking a longer-term view at people, and he gives an example of how that actually helped him restructure the manufacturing process at Next.
We started looking at the factory as a software problem. And the first people we hired in the factory were some software engineers. We convinced them to move from R&D into software, which was not easy. We had to give them bonuses, we had to cajole them, we had to promise them they could come back if they hated it. And they went over there and we said, this is really just a software problem with interesting I/O devices called robots. That's all it is. And so we started building the software first. And our first robots that we got, we spec'd them out, and we bought them completely turnkey with the robot arms on them and all the electronics and the software to control them. And we spec'd it out, but we didn't write it. And they worked okay. Some of them are still in use, but they weren't great. And being software folks, we weren't real happy. They weren't elegant. We couldn't do what we wanted with the robots. We couldn't tie in a quality information system to them and all this other stuff we wanted. So the second generation, we spec'd out the hardware and had somebody build the hardware for us, but we wrote all the software on our own computers. We're object-oriented, so we started writing robot objects, quality objects, all sorts of objects to control this factory. And we found out our computer was great for it. And so our whole factory now runs on this object-oriented factory and quality system.
Investing isn't always monetary. We invest in our future. We bet that everything is going to be okay. We invest in people, based on other people we've observed throughout our lives. We even invest in ourselves. Steve Jobs might have just been the master of that, in so many ways.